So today is Gadadhara Pandit's appearance day. It's a special day for us. Somebody sent me a text message today asking me some questions about my class last year on Gadadhara Pandit's personality. I thought it was a little strange because I'm going to be giving class on the exact subject they're asking about just in a few hours. They waited the whole year and then asked me, I don't know why, they wanted me to give some kind of a double class just for them, going over what they'd forgotten about for 364 days. So I just had to tell them to wait. I think, first of all, to really appreciate Gadadhara Pandit requires a deep dive into our tradition. And I think there's probably 5 distinct ways that if you look at our literatures, you can appreciate and revel in and dive into and identify with Gadadhara Pandit. And each one of them requires, I guess, some nuance, varying degrees of nuance. As a precursor, we can say that for Gaudiyas, for Vaishnavas following in the footsteps of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and we call ourselves Gaudiyas, although technically there are other Vaishnava groups in Bengal, which was known as Gauda Desh, and so they would also be technically Gaudiyas. So amongst academics, they like to call us Chaitanya Vaishnavas, which distinguishes us from other Vaishnava groups in Gauda Desh. But if you look at our traditional literature, there's the Gaudiyas and there's the Udiyas. There's the followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu from West Bengal and East Bengal, really Bengal. The division into West Bengal and East Bengal took place in 1947 with the establishment of East Pakistan, and then furthermore it took place in the early 1970s, I think around 1970, 71, yeah, 71. 70 it started boiling over, in 71 it became formalized. When East Bengal broke free from Pakistan and then became its own country, Bangladesh. And many of our Gaudiya Tirthas are in Bangladesh. It's a whole story there. The population of Bangladesh outnumbers the population of Pakistan, and so they elected a Bangladeshi as the prime minister of Pakistan, but the Bangladeshis were considered to be low class by the Pakistanis, and so they refused to let that person take over, and that led to a civil war in which Hindus were really the losers, and there was a mass exodus, and Bangladesh became a very fanatically Muslim country and persecuted Hindus, specifically Vaishnavas in our lineage, and so many of our holy places are now in Bangladesh. But anyway, traditionally Gauda Desh was a larger country. It comprised West Bengal as well as Bangladesh, and the people who followed Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who were from that part of the subcontinent of India, were called Gaudiyas, and the people who followed Mahaprabhu to varying degrees from Odisha, just south, where Jagannath Puri is located, kind of in the middle of the eastern seaboard of India, they were called Udiyas. And so that term Gaudiya is our term for our people. Academics prefer Chaitanya Vaishnava, but the traditional name is Gaudiya. So we are Gaudiyas. And for Gaudiyas, everything about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ultimately traces back to Krishna. Every single thing, Mahaprabhu as Krishna is linked to Krishna and Krishna Lila and the Bhagavatam. So the Bhagavatam, in a way that no other text does, outlines the pastimes of Sri Krishna. There's other books like the Harivamsa and the Vishnu Purana and different texts which talk about Krishna, but no other text speaks about Krishna as elaborately as the Bhagavat, the Srimad Bhagavatam, and so the Gaudiya tradition holds the Bhagavatam as being the most important text, and the reason why they feel that way is because it speaks the most elaborately about Krishna. And they consider Krishna in Vrindavan to be the zenith of divine revelation, and also the zenith of our potential as souls is to rejoin those pastimes in Vrindavan. Because that's everything to our tradition, then everything which happens in other Leelas is related to Krishna Leela. To give an example, Balaram is Krishna's older brother because previously in Ram Leela, Balaram was Lakshman, and Lakshman was Ram Anuja. He was the younger brother of Ram, and as such he had to do whatever Ram said, and Ram wanted to go to the forest and perform austerities. That caused Lakshman great pain. Lakshman actually wanted to just fight, take over Ayodhya, and install Ram as the king. But Ram refused to do that because he was Maryada Purushottam. He was the incarnation of the greatest personality to teach etiquette and culture. And so Lakshman had to follow Ram. That caused him pain, and so then they made a rule that in all future pastimes, Balaram would be able to be Krishna's older brother, and that way he could serve Krishna to his heart's content. And you find that in Krishna Leela, Balaram is older, and he has mixed affection as a friend, as a brother, and also as an elder, as a parent. And so Balaram in Krishna Leela regularly takes the role of protecting Krishna. In fact, Krishna massages Balaram's feet in Krishna Leela. So Ram Leela is understood in light of Krishna Leela. Or there was the sages in the Dandakaranya forest. They were munis. They saw Ram. They felt that like Ram is the supreme paramour, and they had an attraction to be lovers of Ram. But Ram's pastime, he had Ekpatni Brat, he would only take one wife, and so there was no scope for there ever to be anybody else who had romantic feelings towards Ram other than Shaparnika, who got disfigured as a result of her illicit desires. And so therefore these munis, they became Munichari gopis in Krishna Leela, and Krishna Leela then became the evolution for Balaram. It became the evolution of conjugal love, and Ram Leela is really a lead-up to Krishna Leela. It's really a lead-up to Krishna Leela. So because of the importance we place on Krishna, our Narasimha had no parents, and so there was no possibility of parental affection. But Narasimha wanted parental affection, perhaps because of the love he felt for Prahlad Maharaj. And so therefore, after that, then after Narasimha, all the other incarnations had parents. Parshuram and Ram, Buddha, Kalki, Krishna, Balaram, they all had parents. Whereas prior, Matsya Kurma, Varaha, etc., there were no parents per se. The Lord just appeared. And so all of the Das avatars pastimes, all of the avatars pastimes are all seen in relationship to Krishna, in relationship to Ras, and as part of an evolution of the possibilities of the soul in having an intimate relationship with divinity. Now, Gaur Leela becomes a footnote to Krishna Leela, or another chapter of Krishna's Leela, or another evolution to Krishna Leela. And because Krishna Leela is the zenith, then it's not so much that it's an evolution, because that would demote Krishna Leela to being penultimate, although there might be some ways in which that's true. But for the most part, Gaur Leela is seen as being a replica of Krishna Lila. To some extent, Gaur Lila becomes an addendum or a footnote or a further evolution, but for the most part for our tradition, Gaur Lila is a counterpart. It's the other moiety. It's the other half of Krishna Lila. And so Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna. And then Mahaprabhu has to have a Balaram. So Nityananda is Balaram. And every single thing that happens in Gaur Lila has a counterpoint or a predecessor in Krishna Lila. And in fact, I mean, we really run with this. So now it's not just that you go back to Krishna Lila. You can go back to Krishna Lila and you can go back to Gaur Lila as well, and you can take birth in both Krishna Lila and Gaur Lila. Generally, our lineage wants to become Manjaris, servants of the servants of Radharani in Krishna Lila, and then they become Brahmin boys in Navadvip and join in the Sankirtan mission in Nitya Navadvip. Not all Gaudiyas think this, but our sect certainly does. In fact, there's a Gauranga Lilamrita attributed to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur that fleshes out the Ashtaka Lila, the eightfold daily pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So now when you meditate on the eightfold daily pastimes of Krishna in Ashtaka Lila Smaranam, you also meditate on the 8 daily pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And in fact, you enter into your meditation on Krishna Lila through your meditation on Gaur Lila, which becomes a springboard to enter into Krishna Lila. And you dive into Gaur Lila, and then you come out of the water, and you're in Krishna Lila. And Krishna Lila was like a raging river, as described by our acharyas, but it was collected in the lake of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes. And so if you have a raging rapids, it's difficult to enter into, it's difficult to navigate. But if you then make a lake out of those rapids, then you can easily swim in and immerse yourself in and relish and play in those waters. So Gaur Lila is a lake of the raging river of Krishna Lila. And everything that takes place in Krishna Lila also takes place in Gaur Lila. So every single person in Krishna Lila shows up in Gaur Lila. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Nityananda's main followers are, he has 12 main followers. He actually had more, but there's 12 which are especially prominent, and they are the Dvadas Gopals. They're the 12 cowherd boys. And each one of them is identified with a particular cowherd boy who followed Balaram in Krishna Lila, and therefore they became the heirs to Nityananda's legacy, and they became gurus in Nityananda's lineage. And you want Jagannath Mishra is Nanda Maharaj, and Shachimata is not Devaki. Thank you, Yashoda Devi. And so each personality that occurs in Krishna Lila must also occur in Gaur Lila. So just to recap, there's Gaudiyas and Udiyas. We are Gaudiyas. For Gaudiyas, Krishna Lila is the zenith. Entering into Krishna Lila is the zenith. Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan are the best pastimes. Because of that, the Bhagavatam is the greatest scripture, because the Bhagavatam delineates those pastimes in greater detail than any other text, including the Vishnu Purana, which is very, very popular in South, or the Harivamsa, which is also very popular in South. It goes into these things in more detail, and therefore it is most sacred. Ram Lila, Narasimha Lila, and everything that comes after Krishna Lila, they're all seen in light of Krishna Lila as being lead-ups to or evolutions towards Krishna Lila. But once you get to Krishna Lila, it's everything. And Krishna Lila means conjugal love. Therefore, in Ram Lila, the Munis could not have conjugal love, and therefore Krishna Lila exists, practically speaking, for the purpose of conjugal love. But if you want to be a little more broad, in your Unanta Ujjvala Rasa, Swabhakti Shriyam. If you want to be a little bit more broad in the shining, unprecedented love that was available only in Vrindavan, you could really say that what was available in Vrindavan is forgetfulness of Krishna's divinity, which allows one to, for instance, suckle Krishna at your breast, which allows one to care for Krishna and protect Krishna and play with Krishna and wrestle with Krishna and also dance with Krishna. And so Krishna Leela is really most broadly defined by forgetfulness due to Yoga Maya, who also has to make an appearance. Sita Thakurani, Advaitacharya's counterpart, his spouse, is Yoga Maya. And so Yoga Maya exists as a personality but also as a force in Krishna Leela, which allows for the devotees, the angels in Krishna Leela, to forget Krishna's divinity and to support themselves on equal terms with Krishna and enjoy really, really sweet, intimate pastimes. Within that rarefied air of forgetfulness of Krishna's divinity, then you have conjugal love. And that is something that you find in Krishna Leela that you don't really find in any other pastimes. You get a little bit of forgetfulness. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu met a Brahmana in South India, and the Brahmana in his meditation would forget that he was in the material world, and he began to imagine himself living with Ram, Lakshman, and Sita in the forest. And Mahaprabhu said, how come you haven't prepared lunch? He goes, Sita's off gathering fruits and roots, or Ram is out gathering those things, and Sita will cook them, and then only can we eat. And Mahaprabhu was very pleased that the Brahmana had lost himself in meditation and was imagining himself to have joined Ram Leela and had forgotten Ram's divinity. And so, whereas Mahaprabhu would, generally speaking, convert Ram Bhaktas and turn them into Krishna Bhaktas, he would always convert Vishnu Bhaktas. And 80% of the time he would convert Ram Bhaktas. But once in a while he would meet a Ram Bhakta who was so sold out to Ram because there was this possibility of rasa in that relationship, and he would say, it's okay, you're okay. And so Ram Leela has little bits and pieces of Yoga Maya, but those things see their full manifestation in Krishna Leela. And whether it's Lakshman becoming Balaram, or whether it's the Munis becoming the Munishari Gopis, however you look at it, everything is seen in relationship to Krishna Leela. If you understand this, it's a key, it's like a legend to the map of our entire tradition, and you can understand our tradition infinitely better if you've understood this legend. It helps you read the map of the entire Gaudiya tradition much better. And so what does this mean? It means we want to go and join Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Krishna. And we want to go back to Nitya Navadvip. Navadvip as the other moiety, the other half of Krishna Leela. And we want to go back to Mahaprabhu's pastimes forever and engage in Harinam Sankirtan forever with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And also become manjaris. And so you do both. And our particular sect within the larger Gaudiya framework takes this stuff so seriously that when you meditate on Krishna's pastime, you meditate on the corresponding pastimes in Chaitanya Leela. In fact, we have a Gaur Chandrika Kirtan. And so the Gaur Chandrika Kirtan, which was established in the 1570s at the first Gaur Purnima festival in Keturi, presided over by Mahajanava and conducted by Narottam Das Thakur, the special feature, and we don't know what the kirtan sounds like. Everybody says, this is Narottam's beat, and this is Narottam's style of singing. The Manohar Shahi Kirtan, this particular Chaital beat, is from Narottam's pastimes, but nobody knows because there were no recorders. And if you really look at Indian music the way it exists now, it's practically speaking all cinema songs. Your favorite bhajans are cinema songs that have been repurposed and turned into Krishna bhajan. Almost without exception. Almost without exception. And, some of this are like Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram Patita Pavana Sitaram, something like that, which sounds so ancient and indisputable. Prabhupada remembers when somebody made that up as an offering for Gandhi, and he particularly didn't like that song because he remembers when somebody made it up, and it was a cinema song that was, in his lifetime. Somebody made that up as an offering for Gandhiji, and Prabhupada was not into it. But, if you're born after that time, then you've heard it since you were drinking your mother's breast milk, and it's as old as time for you. So most of our kirtans are, but one thing about the Gaur Chandrika kirtan that's for sure is that you would sing about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes, and then you would sing about the corresponding pastimes in Krishna Lila. And so, what is Gaur Lila? Gaur Lila is Krishna Lila made practicable. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna coming to show you how to enter into Ras Lila in a form that is not impregnable. You're a sadhu, you're celibate, and then you have to enter into romantic pastimes. How do you do it? The pastimes appear to be romantic / sexual in nature, but you're a celibate monk and you want to enter into Krishna Lila. So what do? You disintegrate your material body, and through meditation you enter into that world and construct a body made out of Satchit Ananda, and you meditate in this world on that world, and then you enter into that world. Did you follow? But that's a rough jump. You got to jump from this world to that world. And so Chaitanya Mahaprabhu made a bridge. And what was the bridge? It was Harinam Sankirtan. And so when Mahaprabhu would do Harinam Sankirtan, and he would dance with the devotees in Kirtan, in the exact way we do, that was Ras Lila. And the Brahmanas who danced in that Kirtan were the Manjaris who danced in that Kirtan. The Brahmanas who danced in this Kirtan were the Manjaris who danced and served in that Kirtan. Technically, Manjaris don't dance in Ras Lila. Their assistants, the Sakhis and the Gopis dance. The Manjaris have a little bit more of an arm's length role, but they have more of a role in the Kunjas, and they have to play a more intimate role in the more private pastimes. I'm mentioning Ras Lila. What I really mean is all of the conjugal pastimes, including Ras Lila, but not limited to. And so now you can do kirtan, and you can jump up and down, and you can dance, and through that action, you've now created a bridge where you'll eventually realize that this is that. And now it's not just a jump, some kind of a hypersonic jump from this world to that world, but there's a way to practice. Just like you dress the deity and then eventually you dress Krishna. Just like you bathe the deity and then eventually you bathe Krishna. Just like you cook for the deity and then eventually you cook for Krishna. Now you dance in kirtan and then eventually you dance in that world. Did you guys follow this? Because you're all looking bewildered to me, and which is going to make me have to stop. Did you guys all follow this? Okay. So, the most straightforward way to look at Gaur Lila is that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Bhakta Rupa. He is the form of a Bhakta. He comes into this world to teach you how to do Krishna Bhakti. And in this way, he creates a bridge through which you can enter into Krishna Bhakti, a lake through which you can dive into the water that was previously a raging river. You got it? Okay. That's level one. So then what happens is all of the personalities in Krishna Lila become Vaishnavas in Gaur Lila, and you can pretty much just practice exactly what they do. So who's Gadadhara Pandit? Gadadhara Pandit. And now everything about Gadadhara Pandit and everybody else in Gaur Lila is really how they are related to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ergo, how they are related to Krishna. Everything in Vrindavan is related to Krishna. Everything in Gaur Lila is related to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Everybody and everything. So now, who is Gadadhara Pandit? Gadadhara Pandit is a Vaishnava. Why? Because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was a Vaishnava, teaching you how to dance, and now for Gadadhara Pandit also is a Vaishnava. And you just follow exactly what Gadadhara Pandit does. So what is Gadadhara Pandit? He's meek, he's humble, he's a Vaishnava, he wears white cloth, he's celibate, he's a brahmachari, he does puja, he studies Bhagavatam, he gave his life to divine service, he chants japa. You just do pretty much every single thing that Gadadhara Pandit did. He took Kshetra Sannyas, he lived in a holy place. Pretty much Gadadhara Pandit's life is a perfect example of what the life that you should live in your own life as a Vaishnava. And you can copy point for point every single thing Gadadhara Pandit did in your own life, and that's it. Done. So that's Gadadhara Pandit as a Vaishnava. That's the easiest one to understand. But even to appreciate that, you have to appreciate everything I said before. And so even that one, to properly understand, isn't easy. It's okay to say Gadadhara Pandit's a Vaishnava, but to really understand Gaur Lila in relationship to Krishna Lila as a bridge, and therefore what was more difficult to meditate on becomes more easy to actually practice, that's a higher level of understanding, to appreciate the Vaishnavism of Gadadhara Pandit. But with that understanding, you can pretty much just take notes and copy exactly what Gadadhara Pandit did in his life and do the exact same thing in your life, and you're solid. Next level. Gadadhara, and it's funny, this is only level 2. There's 3 more levels after level 2, and level 2 should seem like there's nothing above it. Level 2 is Gadadhara Pandit's Radharani. And that's an easy one. That's not complicated. Gadadhara Pandit's Radharani because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna. Therefore, Krishna needs a Radharani, and so Balaram's standing on one side, Radharani's standing on the other. And you've got the most intimate forms of love of God, fraternal affection and conjugal affection, and they're represented by Mahaprabhu's right and left sides. Mahaprabhu's Krishna, and therefore Krishna needs a Radharani. And who's that Radharani? That's Gadadhara Pandit. Now that becomes way less practicable. You follow? That becomes way less practicable because there's only one male in all of existence, and that's Krishna. And everything else is therefore derivative. Stri actually means expansion in Sanskrit. It's the term for woman. Like if you see Purush and Stri, if you look on toilets in India, male and female, Stri will be female. But Stri technically means is that? You lost some weight. You're looking great. Yeah, there's really only one male in all of creation. Everything else is derivative, and everything else becomes a servant. So you can't really practice conjugal love because the only person you get to conjugally love is Krishna. You follow? So now if you look at Gadadhara Pandit as Radharani, and you look at Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as Krishna, well, first of all, a straightforward read of that would end up having some kind of homosexual activity going on, which doesn't. So even Gadadhara Pandit as Radharani, it's still then Gadadhara Pandit is offering tambula to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Or Gadadhara Pandit is dancing with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in kirtan. or Gadadhara Pandit is Krishna or Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's best friend. And so when you look at how that conjugal relationship plays out in Gaur Leela, it's all done very appropriately. It's all done very appropriately. And so there is a group of Gaudiyas, not quite Gaudiyas, but sort of semi-Gaudiyas. Yeah, they're kind of semi-Gaudiyas that they dress up as gopis. They actually wear saris. They cross-dress to try and say, hey, we're gopis. We identify so much with the divine feminine that we're going to dress in saris. We're not into it. We've been saying we're not into it for 500 years. Our tradition doesn't indulge it. But you can see, because you're trying to think about how do you become a gopi, how far you take it. So Gadadhara Pandit can be seen as just straight Radharani. Gadadhara Pandit can be seen as straight Radharani. And then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is straight Krishna. But the pastime doesn't look at all like Krishna Leela looks. And if you were to try to make the pastime make it look just like Krishna Leela, it wouldn't work. And some people try, and we criticize them and have for hundreds and hundreds of years. So in that universe, Gadadhara Pandit lives as a brahmana, dances in kirtan, offers food and refreshments to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, serves him, sleeps at the foot of his bed as a servant, and that's kind of like, that's what you can do. Now, amazingly, that still works. So now you can be a Gaudiya Vaishnava, meditating on joining Krishna's pastime as a manjari, live in that way and have this fire burning in your heart, and so you can cultivate conjugal love for Krishna in the spiritual world and pretty much still practice what Gadadhara Pandit did in this world, but with this deeper level of meaning. So you have Gadadhara Pandit as a Vaishnava, now you have Gadadhara Pandit as Radharani. Both of them work, and one of them is more in your meditational life and the other one is practically in your physical life, but there's a physical component to both, but there's an additional meditational component to the second one. But that still involves you jumping into Krishna Leela to fully express conjugal affection for Chaitanya for Krishna. And there is a group that thinks of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as being exactly Krishna. They're called Gaur Nagaris. They're not completely distinct from our tradition, but it's also not really our tradition. We don't, for instance, our goal is to become manjaris in Krishna Leela, but not to become unmarried girls in Navadvip that desire Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to be their husband. That would be a direct corollary. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna in every way, but we never see him as just Krishna, and therefore the Gaur Nagaris, although we appreciate some of their poetry, we generally tend to not dive too much into it. You got to figure it out, because I'm just stretching my mind as it is. Stay, but just do better. You might not realize, but every time she cries, it breaks my meditation, it breaks my ability to speak, and I have to spend a lot of energy refocusing my mind. So there are people who say Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna, and therefore you should meditate on becoming an unmarried village girl in Navadvip in the spiritual world. A manjari in Krishna Leela and a village girl in Navadvip. That's not our program. We want to become Brahmin boys in Gaur Leela. And so still, it's not a direct corollary. And so Gadadhar's behavior as a Brahmana in Nitya Navadvip, serving Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but is actually Radharani in Krishna Leela, that works for us because you could be in a male body performing the rules of Vaishnavism, but then meditating on Krishna's pastimes and meditating on being a manjari in Krishna's pastimes. And so that actually would work. Did you follow that? I don't believe you did. I'm going to say it one more time. Listen more carefully. You spaced out for a second. But you're not smart enough to space out for a second. You'll lose it. A straight Krishna Lila, Gaur Lila breakdown would have you wanting to become an unmarried village girl in Navadvip forever. We don't do that. We want to become Brahmin boys, so there's still a distinction. That means that you could follow Gadadhara Pandit. And so what's Gadadhara Pandit doing in Navadvip? He's serving as a perfect Vaishnava, but he's meditating on Krishna Lila. And that's exactly what a Rag Anugya Bhakta will do in this world. He'll meditate on Krishna's pastimes in the spiritual world as a Manjari, and at the same time serve in this world as a sadhaka, in his sadhaka vesh, in his life as a practicing devotee. For a woman in this world, you have to resist the temptation to think of Krishna the way you would think about a human male that you were romantically attracted to, because then you mess the whole thing up. It's actually easier for men to cultivate conjugal love for Krishna because it's so otherworldly and against their nature. Gay people and women have a harder time because you have to resist the temptation to just draw a parallel from the emotions you feel towards men in this world. You have to completely deconstruct that and then see what you discover in that world. Whereas for a heterosexual male in this world, to meditate on conjugal pastimes in that world automatically requires a full deconstruction, and it automatically requires you to go completely against your grain. So it's actually easier to spot the territory. It's more difficult because it's easier to slip off that razor's edge into mistaking the mundane for the spiritual if you're either gay or you're in a female body. Do you guys follow that? Sometimes people think it's easier as a woman. It's not. It's easier to spoil the whole thing by thinking of it in a mundane way. But it requires even more vigilance to not make that mistake. You guys see what I'm doing? I doubt it. What I'm doing is I'm meticulously walking through the pastimes and the different facets of Gadadhara Pandit's personality in relationship to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and showing how it relates to our lives. Why do we do that? We can do that because we're practicing this stuff. And this is what we spend our time thinking about. So we can talk about it with exactitude, and we can talk about it in incredible detail because it's what we do. It's not fake for us. It's not just something that's there in our literature that we never think about. This is what we spend our time thinking about. So, A, Gadadhar's a Vaishnava, B, Gadadhar's Radharani. Either one is relatively easy to apply. One involves a pretty serious meditational life. You follow me, Rupanugaji?
I'm following you.
Okay. You following this, Radha Krishna Prabhu? If they're following it, okay. Option 3. Now you have to keep in mind, these next 3 are more difficult. And where these next 3 come from is, for us, our sacred literature is revelatory. It is spiritual. It is true. Now, for a lot of our stuff, it has to also be logical. For instance, if you believe in an eternal hell, you can't just say, well, my God says that. Because you could ask a person, do you believe in an all-good, all-powerful God? If they say they do, then you can't legitimately believe in hell. So in comparative religion, or in logical religion, or in the marriage of logic and reason to theism, you have to actually make sense when you theologize. However, there are going to be aspects of your tradition which don't run the risk of being illogical necessarily, and they go far beyond what you could ever demonstrate was a logical necessity. For instance, I could say Krishna plays a flute. Why does he play a flute? Oh, it's a simple instrument available in the forest. It shows something about Krishna's nature as a village deity, as Pan, as a transcendental Cupid living in the forest. It's a simple instrument. It's not a weapon like generally what you see held in the hands of avatars. It's a seductive instrument as opposed to a power instrument. I could make all these arguments, but you could also say, well, why doesn't Krishna just play a veena? Or a harp? Or why doesn't Krishna just sing? Why does he need any instrument at all? So even though we can explain the logic behind the flute, it's not that the flute is a logical necessity. The flute is congruent with our theology. It's congruent with our tradition. There's nothing wrong with the flute. If Krishna was wielding an axe, that would be incongruent with a loving deity, a transcendental Cupid, a spiritual Pan. That would actually be a problem that we'd have to explain. A flute is coherent. It's reasonable. But it's not a logical necessity. And so at a certain point, you stop talking about logical necessities, and the acharyas in your lineage, and your lineage paints a picture of a beautiful world that is. And that world is congruent, but it's transcongruent. It's logical, but it's translogical. It's not merely a logical necessity. It represents the spiritual expression and revelation of your tradition. The next three understandings are that. They're not logical necessities. I would argue the first two are logical necessities. An all-good God would want to make a bridge for you to be able to practice. An all-good God would, naturally have conjugal love as a possibility. That conjugal love would appear in every subsequent manifestation for that manifestation to be full and complete. So we could make arguments that everything we talked about thus far is actually required for a full and complete Purnatama conception of divinity, an absolutely complete conception of divinity. The next three are not that. The next three are the beautiful artistic expressions of our revelatory tradition. They're coherent, they're logical, but they go beyond what you could establish as an absolute logical necessity, and we don't mess around. We'll establish conjugal love, and Vrindavan, and village life, and a Radharani, and a Krishna, and forgetfulness of divinity, and fraternal and romantic love. Those are all logical necessities of a full conception of an absolute loving deity. The next three are not. They're the specific nuances of our tradition. You guys following this? All right. Maybe number three is a logical necessity. I would certainly argue it, but it's harder for me to argue. But as I'm thinking about it now, I would go for it. If someone wanted to challenge me on this, I think I could make a sustainable argument that number three was a logical necessity. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna experiencing what it's like to be Radharani. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna experiencing what it's like to be Radharani. Therefore, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Radharani. Therefore, Gadadhara Pandit can no longer be Radharani because our tradition hates redundancies within the Leela. And everybody has to be exactly one personality. In fact, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as Radharani is such a big feature of the Chaitanya Charitamrita that Gadadhara Pandit gets very little play. Gadadhara Pandit is an Antaranga Bhakta, an internal devotee, or he's Lakshmi Rupa. Teho Lakshmi Rupa, the form of Lakshmi. So, if Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Radharani, Radha Bhava Dyuti Suvalitam Krishna Swarupa. He's Krishna adorned with the sentiments of Radharani, therefore he's become golden. But we could say for all intents and purposes, Krishna is Radharani. If Krishna is Radharani, there's no more room for Gadadhara Pandit to be Radharani. So who does Gadadhara Pandit become then? One answer is Gadadhara Pandit is Lalita. And in fact, the Gaur Govindarchana Smarna Paddhati, which is an entire book dedicated to saying who people are in Krishna Leela. All the associates of Mahaprabhu, who they are in Krishna Leela. It's divided up into the Navadvip associates and the associates from Nilachal, from Jagannath Puri, and delineating exactly who everybody is. And sometimes when there's more than one opinion, he'll say there's two opinions, but this is what it is. Or sometimes he'll say there's two or three opinions, and all of them are possible. And so this stuff was serious in our tradition, was locating each personality, and they would look at the behavior of that personality. They would look for elements within the lifetime and the behavior of that personality, which would then teach you who that personality was. Like sometimes Haridas Thakur is said to be Prahlad. Why? Because he was beaten in 22 marketplaces. Just like Prahlad was beaten by his father and his father tried to kill him, and Narasimha Krishna protected him, and so similarly Chaitanya Mahaprabhu protected Haridas Thakur. Like this, you'll look for elements in the personality, in their relationship with the Lord, and in their behavior, and that'll give you a hint. And devotees spend their whole lives figuring out who is who in which Leela, so when they meditate on the Leelas and they enter into the Leelas, they can navigate their way through it. This is so important. We say that you take birth in Vrindavan, in the material world where Krishna is performing his pastimes, so that you can take birth from the womb of a gopi and learn which village you're from, who your family members are, and exactly how to relate to Krishna. Because Bhauma Vrindavan in this world, is Sadhaka Bhumi, Siddha Bhumi. It's a place where sadhakas meet siddhas, and sadhakas become siddhas because they learn how to think like and enter into Krishna's Leela, where it becomes natural for you and it is in your blood. And you join Krishna Leela. And then you can go back to Golok. Then you can go back to the eternal Goloka Vrindavan. This identifying with the Braja Jana is such a big part of our tradition. I mean, it's really the foundation of Rag Anuga Bhakti, and then it also becomes the foundation of entering into Krishna Leela forever. And so in some ways you can say that Rag Anuga Bhakti is the immature practice stage within sadhana of figuring out how to identify with the Brajajana and make them your life and soul. And then as you go further in the path of Rag Bhakti, it then becomes more and more natural for you. Do you follow that? So, if Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is and you see elements of this in the Leela. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was clawing at his chest. Somebody told him that Krishna's in your heart. He was crying, "Where is Krishna?" Somebody said, "Krishna's in your heart." He started clawing at his own chest. And Gadadhara Pandit held his hand and began chanting verses about Krishna and Vrindavan, about Krishna's appearance in Vrindavan to create an atmosphere of sambhog instead of Vipralamba, so that the heat of Vipralamba would diminish and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would become pacified. The same way that Lalita calmed Radharani down when she was in the fire of separation from Krishna. So within our revealed traditions about the pastimes, you find elements. Those elements are then explored by our tradition, and they get woven into the fabric for astute devotees to take note of. Everybody following this? That's 3. It's okay, stay. Okay? I feel bad, but the truth is I actually just can't think. If you guys are absolutely silent, I can barely think. But if you make noise, it just becomes impossible. If I'm doing something really simple, it's easy. Number 4, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Radharani again, and then Gadadhar becomes Radharani's halo. Gadadhara Pandit becomes Radharani, who gave her very essence to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as a last act of love. This represents an evolution from Krishna Lila. I would say that Krishna wanting to experience the love of his gopis is a logical necessity. There had to be a Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It's a natural evolution from the idea of conjugal love and selfless love. Krishna would have to wonder what was it like to be his own devotee. This next one comes from our tradition's dislike of redundancy. But there's an added element, which I'll explain in just a second. Radharani is described as having a Vama Swabhav, or a left-handed or a fiery nature in this context, as opposed to a Dakshin Swabhav, which is a right-handed or a correct or a proper nature. So Radharani fights with Krishna. Chandravali never fights with Krishna. Radharani gets angry at Krishna. She gets angry at Krishna because Krishna wants such feisty romantic dalliances, and so Radharani is the personification of Mahabhav Swarupini Shri Radha Thakurani. She is the embodiment of these sentiments of feisty love for Krishna. Ultimately, it's a desire to serve Krishna exactly the way he wants that manifests as a fiery nature for Krishna's pleasure, never for her own pleasure, never out of egotism. In fact, when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is describing the love of Radharani, he says that Radharani manifests as fiery nature simply for Krishna's pleasure. And anybody who would hold on to an angry nature and really want to punish Krishna, I curse them to have their head cracked by a thunderbolt. Mahaprabhu speaks like this. Radharani speaks like this. Mahaprabhu, in the mood of Radharani, speaks like this. And says if Krishna wants to enjoy with another gopi, I'll go become her maidservant and serve her so that she'll become enticed to join Krishna. And so Radharani's mood is a mood of service always. This very, very sweet mood of service. It manifests as a conjugal relation. It manifests as a fiery conjugal relation. So Mahabhav. Mahabhav Swarupini, the actual embodiment of Mahabhav, is fiery nature to Radharani. It's what she's made of. She gave that nature to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So what was she left with? She was left with nothing else because she is her Bhav. Her entire existence is her Bhav. If she gives her Bhav to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, then there's nothing left. And therefore Gadadhara Pandit manifests in Gaura Lila a passive Dakshin Swabhav, a pacified, a neutered, humble nature that you don't see from Radharani. Srila Sridhar Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada's godbrother, noticed this in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, where it's mentioned that Gadadhara Pandit is like Chandravali. And Jagat Ananda Pandit is like Satyabhama. And the Gadadhara Pandit is described as having a Dakshin Swabhav, but Radharani has a Vama Swabhav. And so this is a very bizarre thing. So the explanation is that Gadadhara Pandit gave her very essence to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu so he could fully experience what it was like to be Radharani, and then she was left with nothing left, a hollow corpse, a hollow abandoned, like a person bereft of their very life, a person bereft of everything they ever held sacred. And that is Gadadhara Pandit, and therefore Gadadhara Pandit's mood became pacified. And that shows Gaura Lila as being an evolution from Krishna Lila. I would argue that Radharani would be willing to do that for Krishna. So if Krishna and Radharani existed, then Mahaprabhu would have to come, and Mahaprabhu would have to come, and then Gadadhara would have to come in another form and give everything to that Mahaprabhu and perform the greatest sacrifice yet again, as Radharani performed the greatest sacrifice in Krishna Lila. So as I'm thinking it through, I would argue that that's also a logical necessity, but it starts to get to the very edge of what the mind can even comprehend. But it's there in our tradition, and our acharyas think about it, meditate on these things. And that's a fourth explanation. And then a fifth explanation is that Radharani, Gadadhara, is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teacher. And the pastime which demonstrates that is that Mahaprabhu used to sit and learn Bhagavatam from Gadadhara Pandit. Gadadhara Pandit taught Chaitanya Mahaprabhu the Bhagavatam. In fact, there's a verse about this. Nilam bodhi tata sada swavirahak shepanvitam bandhavam. On the shore of the blue ocean, the Lord is there feeling great separation from himself in the association of his friend. Srimad Bhagavati Kata Madiraya Sanjivanam Bhatiyaha. And that person who spoke the Srimad Bhagavatam gave the wine of the Srimad Bhagavatam like the Sanjivani herb, like the medicinal herb, gave the wine of the Bhagavatam like a medicinal herb to revive Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was feeling separation from himself. Swa nayanashrupayanai pujayan, and offered the flowers of his own tears to that Bhagavatam. So Gadadhara Pandit is famous for crying while he taught Chaitanya Mahaprabhu the Bhagavatam. In fact, when one devotee came to get the Bhagavatam from Gadadhara Pandit, to learn the Bhagavatam from Gadadhara Pandit, Srinivasacharya went to meet with Gadadhara Pandit. Gadadhara Pandit gave him the Bhagavatam, but there was no Bhagavatam left because he had cried so many tears, the ink had been washed away from the parchment. And so offering his tears like flower offerings. No, I'm sorry. Swanayanashru payanai pujayan. Offering it like payana. Payas is like sweet rice. It's like a liquid that you offer during a yagna. And so he's offering his own tears as this payas, as this sweet rice, as in a Vedic yagya, he's offering his own tears in that Vedic yagya of reading the Bhagavatam, which was his method of worship, and then that was for his friend who was feeling separation from himself in Jagannath Puri, Goswami, Prabharo Gadadhar Vibhu Bhuyat Mad Eka Gati. I offer my obeisance to Gadadhar Pandit, who's the object of my vision, who's my only goal in life. And so this is Gadadhar Pandit as the teacher of Mahaprabhu. So now Mahaprabhu wants to come and experience the love of Radharani, so Radharani has to come along for the ride in a teaching role and teach Chaitanya Mahaprabhu how to love Krishna like she does. And so now Mahaprabhu has become maddened as an amateur with the love of Radharani. Gadadhara Pandit is there as the headmaster, as the headmistress of that school, teaching how to love like Radharani does, and Mahaprabhu was undergoing an education, and that's from the pastimes of. And so in this way, we can look at the pastimes carefully, and we can see these 5 distinct ones. Gadadhar as Vaishnava, as Radharani, as Lalita, as having had her sentiments plundered, and as Mahaprabhu's teacher. And there are corollaries for each one of these visions in the Leelas and our pastimes, and this is very important to do to understand the multivalent personalities, how they interact with the Lord, in order to appreciate Gadadhar in relationship to Mahaprabhu, Mahaprabhu's Leela in relationship to Krishna Leela, Krishna's Leela as the zenith, and then Gaur Leela either as a counterpart to that or as a further evolution of that. Thank you, IGTV. And you wanted to say something.